Buddha taught 20 secrets that Buddhist monks have guarded for over 2,500 years about how to cure anxiety and depression without medication or years of therapy. Most people never discover the first of these teachings and continue struggling in silence. When you master these ancestral practices, your mind finds lasting peace where before there was only storm. Almost no one learns the 13th secret, and it is precisely this one that breaks the cycle of suffering at its root. Your pain is not a defect. It is a call to awaken. Prepare to sleep while listening to this video. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Have you ever noticed how your mind seems to have a life of its own, especially when you're feeling anxious? One moment you're trying to focus on a task, and the next you're caught in a whirlwind of worries about something that happened yesterday or might happen tomorrow. This mental chaos is exactly what the ancient Buddhist practice of mindfulness was designed to address, and it's proving remarkably effective even in our modern, fast-paced world. Mindfulness, or sati in the original Pali language, is fundamentally about developing the capacity to be fully present with whatever is happening right now, without judgment or resistance. It's a deceptively simple concept, but profoundly transformative in practice. When we're mindful, we're not trying to escape our anxiety or push it away. Instead, we're learning to be with it in a different way. What makes mindfulness particularly powerful for managing anxiety is that it directly addresses the root of the problem. Anxiety isn't just about feeling nervous or worried. It's a complex state involving racing thoughts, physical tension, and a tendency to catastrophize about the future. Mindfulness works on all these levels simultaneously. By training our attention to rest in the present moment, we naturally interrupt the cycle of anxious thinking that projects us into an imagined future full of disasters that haven't happened yet. Modern scientific research has thoroughly validated what Buddhist practitioners have known for centuries. Studies using advanced brain imaging techniques have shown that regular mindfulness practice actually changes the structure and function of the brain. After just 8 weeks of consistent practice, researchers have observed decreased activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system that triggers our fight or flight response. At the same time, they've noted increased density in areas associated with attention, sensory processing, and emotional regulation. The beauty of mindfulness lies in its accessibility. While some meditation practices might require specific postures or extended periods of silence, mindfulness can be practiced anywhere, anytime. You can practice while washing dishes, walking to work, or even during a stressful conversation. The essence of the practice remains the same, bringing full attention to your direct experience in the present moment. A basic mindfulness practice for anxiety might start with simply noticing your breath, not controlling it or changing it, just feeling the natural rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. When you notice your mind wandering off into worries or planning, which it inevitably will, you gently bring your attention back to the breath. This isn't about achieving some special state or forcing your mind to be quiet. It's about training your capacity to notice when you've been carried away by thoughts and to deliberately redirect your attention. With consistent practice, you begin to develop what Buddhists call meta-awareness, the ability to observe your own mental processes without being completely identified with them. This creates a crucial space between stimulus and response. Instead of anxiety automatically triggering more anxiety in an escalating cycle, you can recognize, I'm having anxious thoughts right now, and choose how to respond rather than react. One of the most liberating insights that emerges from mindfulness practice is the recognition that thoughts are just thoughts, mental events that arise and pass away like clouds in the sky. They aren't necessarily true, and they don't define who you are. For someone suffering from anxiety, this realization can be revolutionary. Those catastrophic thoughts that feel so compelling and real are just temporary mental constructions, not accurate predictions of what will happen. Buddhist psychology offers a helpful framework for understanding our experience through what's called the five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. By systematically bringing mindful awareness to each of these components of experience, we can see more clearly how anxiety is constructed moment by moment rather than being a solid, unchangeable state. For example, anxiety often manifests physically as tightness in the chest, shallow breathing, or tension in the shoulders. Mindfulness allows us to notice these bodily sensations form with curiosity rather than aversion. We might also notice the unpleasant feeling tone that accompanies anxiety, feeling. Our interpretation of these sensations as threatening, perception. The stories our mind generates about what might go wrong, mental formations. And the quality of awareness itself as it observes all this, consciousness. This detailed, non-judgmental observation gradually disassembles the seemingly solid experience of my anxiety into its component parts, each of which is constantly changing and more workable than the overwhelming whole. Many people find it helpful to engage with mindfulness through guided practices or in groups, especially when beginning. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, are two structured programs that have adapted Buddhist mindfulness practices for contemporary settings. Without requiring any particular religious or spiritual commitment, the effectiveness of mindfulness doesn't depend on how long you practice each day, but rather on the consistency of your practice. Even 10 minutes of daily mindfulness meditation can create significant changes in your relationship to anxiety over time. What matters most is bringing the quality of mindful awareness to more and more moments throughout your day. It's worth noting that mindfulness isn't a quick fix or a way to eliminate anxiety altogether. In fact, trying to use mindfulness to get rid of anxiety often backfires, creating more tension and resistance. Instead, mindfulness helps us develop a different relationship with our anxiety, one characterized by greater spaciousness, acceptance, and wisdom. Over time, this new relationship naturally reduces the intensity and duration of anxious episodes and diminishes their impact on our overall well-being. In the Buddhist tradition, mindfulness is actually just one aspect of a comprehensive approach to transforming suffering. It works most effectively when practiced alongside other elements like ethical conduct, wise understanding, and compassion. This holistic approach recognizes that our mental health isn't separate from how we live, the choices we make, and how we relate to ourselves and others. By bringing mindful awareness to our experience moment by moment, we gradually cultivate a mind that is more stable, clear, and spacious. From this foundation, we can respond to life's challenges, including anxiety, with greater wisdom and compassion, rather than being driven by automatic reactions and habitual patterns. This is the profound gift that the Buddhist practice of mindfulness offers to our anxious modern world. The Four Noble Truths as a framework for understanding and overcoming psychological suffering. Imagine going to a doctor who not only diagnoses your illness with precision but also explains exactly why you got sick, assures you complete healing is possible, and provides a detailed treatment plan. This is essentially what the Buddha offered 2,600 years ago when he presented the Four Noble Truths, a comprehensive framework for understanding and transforming human suffering, including what we now call anxiety and depression. And the Buddha wasn't a god or a mystic, but a practical psychologist who dedicated his life to solving the problem of suffering. After his own transformative awakening, he distilled his insights into this elegant four-part framework that remains remarkably relevant to our modern psychological challenges. Far from being abstract philosophy, the Four Noble Truths offer a practical diagnostic and treatment approach that parallels modern clinical methods while adding crucial dimensions often overlooked in contemporary care. The first noble truth is the truth of dukkha. often translated as suffering, but actually encompassing a much broader range of experiences, including stress, dissatisfaction, and a pervasive sense that something isn't quite right with our lives. The Buddha recognized that suffering is a universal human experience, affecting everyone regardless of their wealth, status, or circumstances. This acknowledgement is profoundly validating for those struggling with mental health issues, who often feel isolated in their pain or ashamed that they can't just be happy. In this first truth, the Buddha essentially normalizes psychological suffering, not as a personal failing, but as an inevitable part of human experience. For someone dealing with anxiety or depression, this perspective immediately reduces the secondary suffering that comes from feeling "I shouldn't feel this way" or "something is wrong with me because I feel this way." The first noble truth invites us to honestly acknowledge our suffering rather than denying it or covering it up with distractions. The second noble truth identifies the cause of suffering as tanha, commonly translated as craving or attachment. This isn't just about obvious addictions or desires, but about a much more fundamental way we relate to experience. We habitually crave pleasant experiences to continue and unpleasant ones to end. We resist the natural flow of change, trying to hold on to what we like and push away what we don't like. This constant struggle against reality generates tremendous psychological tension. For those dealing with anxiety, this truth illuminates how our desperate attempts to control uncertainties and avoid discomfort actually intensify our suffering. For those experiencing depression, it reveals how attachment to certain self-concepts, "I'm worthless," expectations, "I should be further along in life," or past experiences, "things will never be good again," perpetuates depressive states. The second noble truth shows us that our suffering isn't primarily caused by external circumstances, but by how we relate to those circumstances. The third noble truth offers profound hope. There is a cessation of suffering. Complete freedom from psychological distress is possible. This isn't just positive thinking or wishful optimism, but a verified reality based on the Buddha's own experience and that of countless practitioners over the centuries. For someone in the depths of depression or gripped by panic attacks, this truth offers a genuine light at the end of the tunnel, the assured possibility of transformation. Importantly, this cessation doesn't come from finding perfect external circumstances, but from changing our internal relationship with experience. It's not about arranging the world so nothing ever triggers us again, an impossible task, but about transforming our habitual reactions so we respond to life's challenges with wisdom rather than automatic patterns that perpetuate suffering. The fourth noble truth provides the practical path to this transformation, the Noble Eightfold Path. This comprehensive approach includes ethical conduct, how we behave, mental discipline, how we work with our mind, and wisdom, how we understand reality. Unlike some simplified spiritual teachings that suggest a single technique or perspective is sufficient, the Buddha recognized that genuine transformation requires working with all aspects of our lives and minds. For someone dealing with anxiety or depression, the Eightfold Path offers concrete practices addressing different dimensions of their experience. Right view helps them recognize unhelpful thought patterns and develop a more accurate understanding of their situation. Right intention cultivates motivations of kindness and compassion toward themselves, counteracting the harsh self-criticism common in depression. Right speech, action, and livelihood guide them toward behaviors that support rather than undermine their mental health. Right effort teaches the crucial balance between working with difficult mental states without forcing or struggling. Right mindfulness develops the capacity to be present with experience rather than lost in rumination about the past or worries about the future. And right concentration cultivates mental stability that serves as a foundation for all other practices. What makes the Four Noble Truths particularly valuable for addressing psychological suffering is their systemic, multi-level approach. They recognize that mental health challenges aren't simple problems with simple solutions, but complex conditions requiring work on multiple fronts. They acknowledge both the immediate need to alleviate symptoms and the deeper work of addressing root causes for lasting transformation. Perhaps most importantly, the Four Noble Truths approach psychological suffering with profound compassion. There's no blame or pathologizing, just a clear recognition of universal human patterns and their consequences. There's no false promise of instant results, but there is a well-mapped path of gradual transformation based on natural psychological principles. Modern adaptations of Buddhist psychology, such as mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, have drawn heavily from the framework of the Four Noble Truths, translating these ancient insights into contemporary therapeutic approaches. Research consistently demonstrates the effectiveness of these approaches for conditions like recurrent depression and anxiety disorders. The Four Noble Truths remind us that while quick fixes and symptom management have their place, lasting mental health requires a deeper engagement with how our minds work and how we relate to our experience. They offer both immediate relief strategies and a long-term path of transformation. They balance acceptance of our current reality with active engagement in practices that cultivate greater well-being. For anyone navigating the challenges of anxiety, depression, or other forms of psychological suffering, the Four Noble Truths provide a comprehensive framework that addresses not just the elimination of symptoms, but the cultivation of genuine well-being. They offer not just techniques, but a complete path toward freedom from suffering and the discovery of lasting inner peace. While the Four Noble Truths provide the essential framework for understanding and working with psychological suffering, Buddhist tradition offers specific concepts and practices that directly address common challenges in anxiety and depression. Two particularly powerful approaches involve understanding impermanence and cultivating loving-kindness meditation. The concept of impermanence, or anicca in Pali, stands as one of Buddhism's most profound and liberating insights. At its core, impermanence simply means that everything changes, nothing remains static. While this might seem obvious intellectually, our minds tend to operate as if certain things should be permanent, which creates tremendous suffering when reality inevitably contradicts this assumption. For those struggling with anxiety and depression, a deep understanding of impermanence can be transformative. When experiencing intense anxiety, the mind often gets trapped in the false belief that this feeling will last forever, or I'll never get through this. The anxious mind projects current discomfort infinitely into the future, creating a sense of hopelessness that magnifies the original distress. Similarly, depression often involves the conviction that I'll always feel this way, or things will never get better. Understanding impermanence doesn't mean dismissing these difficult experiences or telling yourself to just get over it. Instead, it involves developing a more accurate relationship with reality. All emotions, whether pleasant or unpleasant, arise, peak, and eventually fade away. This isn't just positive thinking. It's a verifiable fact about how our minds and bodies function. A simple yet powerful practice for working with impermanence involves mindfully observing how sensations, thoughts, and emotions naturally change over time. When experiencing anxiety, you might notice where you feel it in your body, perhaps as tightness in the chest, shortness of breath, or a knot in the stomach. Rather than trying to make these sensations go away, you can bring curious attention to them, noticing how they fluctuate in intensity, location, and quality from moment to moment. With consistent practice, you begin to recognize that even the most intense emotional states aren't solid monoliths, but flowing processes made up of changing elements. A panic attack that felt unbearable and eternal in the past might now be recognized as an intense but temporary storm of physical sensations, thoughts, and emotions, all of which will pass. Beyond helping manage difficult emotional states, understanding impermanence also addresses deeper causes of suffering. much of our anxiety stems from attempting to secure permanent happiness by controlling inherently impermanent conditions. We believe that if we can just get the right job, relationship, house, or achievement, we'll be set forever. This fundamental misunderstanding sets us up for perpetual disappointment as we try to hold on to things that cannot last. The Buddha observed that our relationship with impermanence typically involves three problematic patterns. We cling to pleasant experiences, wanting them to continue. We push away unpleasant experiences, wanting them to end. And we ignore neutral experiences, missing their potential value. These three reactions, craving, aversion, and ignorance, keep us in a constant state of tension with reality rather than flowing with it. Importantly, embracing impermanence doesn't lead to nihilism or despair. Quite the opposite. When we stop fighting against the changing nature of reality, we can actually appreciate each moment more fully. We can enjoy pleasant experiences without the desperate clinging that comes from trying to make them permanent. We can move through difficult experiences with more grace, knowing they too will change. And we can pay attention to ordinary moments that might otherwise pass unnoticed. Buddhist practice offers various contemplations to develop a more intuitive understanding of impermanence. One approach involves regularly reflecting on how your body, thoughts, relationships, and circumstances have changed throughout your life. Another practice involves observing natural processes of change, like clouds moving across the sky, seasons changing, or even watching a cup of hot tea gradually cool. Modern psychology has incorporated this ancient wisdom in approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, which teaches the acceptance of changing emotional states rather than struggling against them. Similarly, mindfulness-based therapies emphasize observing the arising and passing of thoughts and emotions without getting caught in them. For someone with anxiety, working with impermanence might mean noticing the thoughts, "What if I fail?" Or "What if something terrible happens?" and recognizing them as temporary mental events rather than accurate predictions. For someone with depression, it might mean noticing the thought, "I'll always feel this way," and remembering that countless mood states have already come and gone throughout their life. The liberation that comes from deeply understanding impermanence doesn't happen overnight. It's cultivated gradually through consistent practice and reflection. But even beginning to question our assumptions about permanence can bring immediate relief from some forms of psychological suffering. As we develop a healthier relationship with impermanence, we naturally become less overwhelmed by difficult emotions and less frantically attached to pleasant ones. We develop a kind of emotional resilience that comes not from controlling our experience, but from moving with it more skillfully. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. Rather, we engage with life more fully and effectively because we're not wasting energy fighting against its fundamental nature. While understanding impermanence helps us relate more wisely to our experience, we also need practices that actively cultivate positive mental states to counterbalance the negative thought patterns of anxiety and depression. This is where loving-kindness meditation, or metta practice, becomes invaluable. Loving-kindness meditation is a systematic practice of developing goodwill, benevolence, and warmth toward ourselves and others. It directly addresses the patterns of harsh self-criticism, isolation, and hostility that often accompany depression and anxiety, where cognitive therapies work to change the content of negative thoughts. Metta practice changes our relationship with ourselves at a more fundamental level. The practice typically begins with directing well wishes toward yourself using simple phrases such as, "May I be happy," "May I be healthy," "May I be safe," "May I live with ease." These aren't affirmations meant to convince yourself of something you don't believe. Rather, they're expressions of an intention, a sincere wish for your own well-being. For many people, especially those with depression or low self-esteem, simply wishing themselves well can feel revolutionary. What makes metta practice particularly powerful is that it works directly with the heart and emotions, not just with thoughts. While cognitive approaches help identify and challenge irrational beliefs, metta cultivation addresses the emotional tone of your relationship with yourself. Many people with depression know intellectually that their harsh self-judgments aren't accurate or helpful, but they still feel worthless or unlovable. Metta practice works to transform these feelings through the direct cultivation of warmth and kindness. After establishing this foundation of self-kindness, the practice gradually expands to include others. First, someone you care about deeply, then a neutral person you neither like nor dislike, then someone difficult, and finally, all beings everywhere. This progressive expansion helps break down the barriers we typically maintain between ourselves and others, counteracting the isolation that often accompanies depression. Neuroscience research has shown that regular loving-kindness practice activates and strengthens brain regions associated with positive emotions and empathy. Studies have found that even brief periods of metta meditation can increase positive emotions, reduce pain sensitivity, and enhance feelings of social connection. For people with depression, who often experience emotional numbness and disconnection, these effects can be particularly valuable. What makes metta practice different from simply trying to think positive is its systematic nature and emotional authenticity. The practice doesn't ask you to deny difficult feelings or paste a smile over genuine pain. Instead, it acknowledges suffering and responds to it with care rather than criticism. When you notice pain, whether physical or emotional, the practice invites you to meet that pain with kindness rather than resistance or shame. For anxiety sufferers, metta practice can be particularly helpful in addressing the fear-based thinking that drives worry and panic. Anxiety often involves a fundamental sense that the world is threatening and that you're not equipped to handle what might come. Loving-kindness practice gradually replaces this fearful orientation with one based on warmth and connection, reducing the baseline level of threat that the nervous system perceives. One of the most powerful aspects of metta practice for those with depression is how it directly counteracts the tendency toward rumination, the repetitive negative thinking that perpetuates and deepens depressive episodes. By intentionally generating thoughts of kindness and well-being, you're literally giving your mind something different to focus on, creating new neural pathways that can gradually become stronger than the well-worn paths of self-criticism. Buddhist psychology understands that emotions like kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity are skills that can be developed through practice, not fixed traits you either have or don't have. This perspective offers tremendous hope for those who feel stuck in patterns of self-hatred or fear. Just as you can strengthen a muscle through regular exercise, you can strengthen your capacity for kindness through consistent practice. The Buddha taught metta as part of a set of practices known as the Brahma Viharas, or divine abodes, qualities of heart and mind that create a foundation for psychological well-being and spiritual growth. These include not just loving kindness, but also compassion, caring response to suffering, sympathetic joy, happiness at others' good fortune, and equanimity, balanced perspective in all situations. For someone dealing with depression, cultivating these qualities creates a powerful alternative to the mental habits of self-criticism, comparison, and hopelessness. For someone with anxiety, they offer an antidote to fear-based reactivity and the tendency to see danger everywhere. Together with the understanding of impermanence, these heart-centered practices create a comprehensive approach to transforming the patterns that maintain psychological suffering. Building on these foundational Buddhist practices, we find that addressing anxiety and depression effectively requires a balanced approach. The Buddha discovered this principle through his own direct experience, and it remains one of his most practical teachings for our modern psychological challenges. The middle way represents one of Buddhism's most essential principles, discovered by the Buddha through his own journey of trial and error. Before his awakening, Siddhartha Gautama, who would later become the Buddha, tried two extreme approaches in his search for freedom from suffering. First, as a prince, He lived a life of luxury and sensual indulgence, finding that it left him feeling empty and dissatisfied despite having everything he could desire. Then, as an ascetic, he practiced extreme self-denial and mortification, nearly starving himself to death while engaging in harsh spiritual practices. He discovered that this approach not only weakened his body but clouded his mind, taking him further from his goal of clear understanding. This personal experience led to a profound insight. Neither extreme self-indulgence nor extreme self-denial leads to genuine well-being. The path to freedom from suffering lies in a balanced middle way between these extremes. This principle applies remarkably well to our modern understanding of anxiety treatment. People struggling with anxiety often fall into one of two counterproductive patterns. Some become caught in constant fighting against their anxiety, trying to control, eliminate, or suppress every anxious thought and sensation. This approach typically backfires, creating a tense, exhausting struggle that actually intensifies anxiety. The more desperately you try to stop feeling anxious, the more your body and mind tend to activate stress responses, creating a vicious cycle. At the other extreme, some people become completely passive or resigned to their anxiety, believing they're powerless to change their condition. They might avoid situations that trigger anxiety, withdraw from activities they once enjoyed, or simply endure their suffering without seeking any kind of help or engaging with practices that could bring relief. The middle way offers a more balanced approach. It involves neither fighting against anxiety nor passively surrendering to it, but instead cultivating a relationship with anxiety characterized by mindful awareness, compassionate acceptance, and skillful action. This approach recognizes anxiety as part of your current experience without defining your identity or determining your future. In practice, the middle way approach to anxiety might look like this. When anxiety arises, you acknowledge its presence without judgment. I'm feeling anxious right now, rather than immediately trying to make it go away or berating yourself for feeling it. You bring mindful attention to the physical sensations, thoughts, and emotions that make up the experience, allowing them to be present without struggling against them or becoming completely identified with them. At the same time, you take appropriate action to support your well-being. This might include using breathing techniques to regulate your nervous system, engaging in moderate physical exercise, reaching out for social support, or applying cognitive tools to work with anxious thinking patterns. The key distinction is that these actions come from a place of care and wisdom rather than desperate aversion to your experience. The middle way applies not just to how you relate to anxiety itself, but to many aspects of recovery. For instance, it suggests balancing self-reliance with willingness to receive support from others. Trying to overcome anxiety entirely on your own often leads to isolation and overwhelm, while becoming completely dependent on others for reassurance can prevent you from developing your own inner resources. Similarly, the middle way guides the balance between structure and flexibility in your recovery process. Some structure is helpful: regular meditation practice, consistent sleep schedule, boundaries around stress exposure, but rigid adherence to rules or techniques can become another form of anxious control. The middle way encourages finding what works for your unique situation while remaining adaptable as conditions change. Perhaps most importantly, the middle way invites a balanced relationship with the recovery process itself. Many people approach anxiety treatment with either impatient demands for immediate results or passive hopelessness that nothing will ever help. The middle way suggests a patient, persistent engagement with healing practices, neither expecting overnight transformation nor resigning yourself to permanent suffering. The Buddha's insight about the middle way came partly from understanding that both extreme self-indulgence and extreme self-denial are forms of attachment to pleasure in the first case and to the idea of purification through suffering in the second. Neither approach allows for true freedom. Similarly, both fighting against anxiety and passively submitting to it represent forms of attachment that keep you bound to suffering. Modern therapeutic approaches have increasingly incorporated this balanced perspective. Acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, for example, emphasizes accepting difficult thoughts and feelings rather than struggling with them, while simultaneously taking values-based action to create a meaningful life. Dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, explicitly works with the balance between acceptance and change. These approaches echo the Buddha's ancient wisdom about the middle way. One helpful way to understand the middle way approach to anxiety is through the Buddhist concept of wise effort. Traditional teachings describe 4 aspects of wise effort: preventing unwholesome states from arising, letting go of unwholesome states that have already arisen, cultivating wholesome states that haven't yet arisen, and maintaining wholesome states that have already arisen. Applied to anxiety, this means taking reasonable precautions to prevent unnecessary stress, like setting healthy boundaries or avoiding excessive stimulants, working skillfully with anxiety that's already present, cultivating positive mental states like calm and confidence, and maintaining healthy practices and perspectives that support your well-being. The beauty of the middle way is that it's inherently flexible and responsive to your actual experience rather than imposing rigid rules. It acknowledges both the reality of suffering and the possibility of transformation. It honors the truth that healing happens gradually through consistent practice while remaining open to moments of significant insight or breakthrough. Finding this balance isn't a one-time achievement, but a continuous process of adjustment as conditions change. Some days you might need more emphasis on gentle acceptance, while other days call for more active engagement with change practices. The middle way isn't the midpoint between 2 extremes, but the dynamic, responsive path that adapts to the terrain of your life and practice. This balanced approach naturally leads us to another powerful Buddhist concept for addressing mental suffering: non-attachment, or nekkhamma in Pali. While the middle way helps us find balance in how we work with anxiety, non-attachment offers profound insights for liberating ourselves from depressive mental patterns. Non-attachment is often misunderstood in Western contexts. It doesn't mean not caring, becoming emotionally numb, or withdrawing from life. Rather, it refers to a wise relationship with experience that doesn't cling to pleasant states or push away unpleasant ones. It's about holding life with open hands rather than a tight grip. This concept is particularly relevant for depression, which often involves intense attachment to negative thought patterns, self-concepts, and narratives about the past or future. Someone experiencing depression might be firmly attached to beliefs like, "I'll never be happy," "I'm fundamentally flawed," or "My life has been a series of failures." These thoughts aren't just passing mental events but become solid, defining truths that shape how the person sees themselves and their world. Depression also commonly involves attachment to particular expectations or outcomes. Someone might believe they can only be happy if specific conditions are met, if they achieve certain goals, if others approve of them, or if painful past experiences could somehow be undone. When reality inevitably fails to match these rigid expectations, disappointment and despair deepen. The practice of non-attachment offers a way to loosen the grip of these depressive thought patterns. It begins with developing the capacity to observe thoughts arising in the mind without immediately identifying with them or believing they represent absolute truth. Through mindfulness practice, you can start to recognize thoughts as just thoughts, mental events that appear in consciousness rather than direct reflections of reality. For example, when the thought, "I'm a failure," arises, non-attachment allows you to notice there's the "I'm a failure" thought again, rather than immediately accepting it as an accurate assessment of your worth. This creates crucial space between you and your depressive thinking patterns, making them less overwhelming and all-encompassing. Buddhist meditation teacher Joseph Goldstein offers a helpful phrase for this practice: not identifying with the contents of consciousness. This means you can have depressive thoughts without becoming completely defined by them. you can experience sadness, grief, or disappointment without concluding this is who I am or this is all I'll ever feel. Another aspect of non-attachment involves loosening our grip on fixed self-concepts. Depression often includes a solid sense of self as deficient, damaged, or unworthy. Buddhist psychology challenges this view, pointing out that our sense of self is actually a process rather than a fixed entity. It's continuously constructed through our identification with certain thoughts, memories, roles, and qualities while rejecting others. Through practices like mindfulness meditation, we can directly observe how this process of self-construction operates, seeing more clearly how we maintain a depressive self-identity through selective attention, rumination, and habitual thought patterns. As we develop non-attachment to this constructed self-image, we create space for new possibilities of how we might experience ourselves and the world. Non-attachment also applies to how we relate to the past and future. Depression frequently involves ruminating about past events, replaying mistakes, losses, or traumas, or catastrophizing about the future. While the mind is caught in these time periods, it's not available to experience the present moment, where possibilities for joy, connection, and meaning exist. Practicing non-attachment means neither suppressing memories of the past nor refusing to plan for the future, but rather holding these mental activities more lightly. We can remember the past without being defined by it and consider the future without believing we can predict it with certainty. This looser relationship with time allows us to be more fully present with what's actually happening now. Importantly, non-attachment doesn't mean not caring about outcomes or not having preferences. It means holding our desires and aversions with awareness rather than being blindly driven by them. Someone practicing non-attachment might still prefer health over illness or success over failure, but they don't make their basic well-being contingent on these conditions. For those with depression, this principle can be transformative. It suggests that while we naturally prefer to feel happy rather than sad, we can develop the capacity to be okay regardless of what emotions are present. Our fundamental worth and capacity for peace aren't dependent on always feeling good. In practical terms, cultivating non-attachment involves regular meditation practice that develops awareness of how we cling to certain experiences and push away others. It includes noticing the physical sensations associated with attachment, the tension, contraction, or pressure that accompanies holding tightly to particular outcomes or self-concepts. And it involves deliberately practicing letting go, not as a way to bypass difficult emotions, but as a skill in relating to them more wisely. The paradox of non-attachment is that by loosening our desperate grip on happiness, we actually create conditions more conducive to genuine well-being. When we're not constantly judging our experience as right or wrong, acceptable or unacceptable, we can be more fully present with the richness of each moment, including its challenges and difficulties. For someone with depression, practicing non-attachment doesn't mean becoming passive or resigned to suffering. Instead, it means engaging in treatment and self-care without the additional burden of rigid expectations, self-judgment, or desperate striving. It means working with difficult emotions skillfully rather than being overwhelmed by them or defined by them. As with the middle way, the practice of non-attachment isn't a one-time achievement, but an ongoing process of recognizing where we're holding on too tightly and gently loosening our grip. This gradual cultivation of a more spacious relationship with experience creates the foundation for genuine freedom from depressive patterns. While both the middle way and non-attachment offer powerful conceptual frameworks for working with anxiety and depression, many people naturally wonder whether there's scientific evidence supporting these ancient practices. After all, in our modern world, we often look to science to validate approaches before fully embracing them. The exciting reality is that, over the past few decades, neuroscientific research has been providing remarkable evidence for what Buddhist practitioners have known experientially for centuries. The scientific investigation of Buddhist meditation practices began in earnest during the 1970s, but has exploded since the early 2000s with the development of advanced brain imaging technologies. These tools allow researchers to observe the living brain in action, tracking changes in structure and function associated with regular meditation practice. What they've discovered is nothing short of revolutionary for our understanding of mental health. One of the most consistent findings is that regular mindfulness meditation practice actually changes the physical structure of the brain through a process scientists call neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. In a landmark study conducted at Massachusetts General Hospital, researchers found that just 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation practice led to measurable increases in grey matter density in brain regions associated with learning, memory, emotional regulation, and empathy. Particularly relevant for anxiety and depression is the finding that meditation strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for executive function and rational thinking, while simultaneously reducing activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system that triggers our fight or flight response. This helps explain why meditators often report feeling less reactive and more able to respond thoughtfully to stressors rather than automatically with fear or anger. Brain imaging studies show that long-term meditators develop increased thickness in regions associated with attention and sensory processing. They also show enhanced connectivity between brain regions that process emotions and those responsible for higher-order cognitive functions. This improved communication between the emotional and rational parts of the brain helps explain the increased emotional regulation capacity that meditation develops. Beyond these structural changes, researchers have identified functional changes in how the brain processes information during and after meditation practice. For instance, experienced meditators show increased gamma wave activity, associated with higher states of consciousness and improved cognitive function. They also demonstrate reduced activity in the default mode network, the brain regions active when our mind is wandering, ruminating about the past, or worrying about the future. This reduction in default mode network activity is particularly significant for mental health, as excessive activity in this network is strongly associated with both anxiety and depression. When we're caught in repetitive negative thinking, catastrophizing, or harsh self-judgment, it's often the default mode network that's driving these patterns. Meditation helps to quiet this network, allowing for more present moment awareness and less unhelpful mind-wandering. Research has also documented the effects of meditation on our stress response systems. Regular practice reduces levels of the stress hormone cortisol and dampens inflammatory responses throughout the body. This is crucial because chronic inflammation is increasingly recognized as playing a role in depression. Some researchers now consider depression not just a brain disorder, but a whole-body inflammatory condition, making meditation's anti-inflammatory effects potentially therapeutic. Fascinating studies on gene expression show that meditation can actually affect which genes are turned on or off in our cells, a process known as epigenetic modification. One study found that experienced meditators showed reduced expression of pro-inflammatory genes and increased expression of genes associated with energy metabolism and insulin secretion. This suggests that meditation's benefits extend all the way to the molecular level of our biology. For those suffering from anxiety disorders, research on the vagus nerve, a key component of our parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system, shows that meditation strengthens vagal tone, enhancing our capacity to return to a calm state after stress. This improved vagal tone helps explain why regular meditators often report less reactivity to potential triggers and a greater sense of baseline calm in their daily lives. Studies specifically examining meditation's effects on clinical anxiety and depression have shown promising results. A meta-analysis published in JAMA Internal Medicine found that mindfulness meditation programs had moderate evidence of improved anxiety and depression symptoms. Another review in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology found that mindfulness-based cognitive therapy MBCT, reduced the risk of depression relapse by 43% in patients with recurrent depression. What's particularly exciting about these findings is that they validate not just the effectiveness of Buddhist meditation techniques, but also help explain the mechanisms by which they work. We now understand that meditation isn't just making people feel better temporarily, it's creating lasting changes in brain structure and function that increase resilience against mental health challenges. The science also confirms the Buddhist emphasis on regular practice. Most studies showing significant brain changes involve participants meditating for at least 20 minutes daily over 8 weeks or more. This aligns with the traditional understanding that meditation is a skill developed through consistent practice rather than a quick fix or occasional intervention. Importantly, the research suggests that different meditation practices affect the brain in different ways. Focused attention practices like concentration meditation strengthen neural networks involved in attention and cognitive control. Open monitoring practices like mindfulness develop networks associated with present moment awareness and metacognition. And loving kindness meditation activates and strengthens circuits involved in empathy and positive emotions. This scientific validation has helped bring Buddhist meditation practices into mainstream healthcare settings, where they're increasingly offered as complementary approaches for managing various mental health conditions. Major medical centers now offer mindfulness-based programs, and insurance companies increasingly cover these interventions based on the growing evidence for their effectiveness. For someone struggling with anxiety or depression, this research offers evidence-based hope that these conditions aren't fixed or permanent, but can be transformed through regular practice. The brain's neuroplasticity means that even long-established patterns of negative thinking or emotional reactivity can be changed with consistent effort and the right techniques. While the science behind meditation is compelling, equally important is understanding how Buddhist wisdom about interdependence can transform our negative thought patterns. This concept offers profound insights into how our minds construct problematic narratives and how we can intervene in this process. The Buddhist teaching of dependent origination, Paticca Samuppada in Pali, reveals that nothing exists independently. Everything arises in dependence upon multiple causes and conditions. Applied to our mental life, this means that negative thoughts and emotions aren't random events or inherent aspects of who we are, but arise from specific conditions that can be identified and addressed. For someone caught in depressive thinking, this perspective offers a crucial entry point for change. Rather than seeing depression as a solid, monolithic state, I'm depressed, the principle of interdependence invites us to see it as a complex process made up of interconnected elements, thoughts triggering emotions, emotions influencing physical sensations, sensations reinforcing thoughts, and so on. By recognizing this web of interdependent factors, we can identify multiple points for intervention. Maybe we notice that certain thought patterns consistently trigger a cascade of depressive symptoms. Or perhaps we observe that physical fatigue makes us more vulnerable to negative thinking. These insights give us specific places to intervene in the cycle rather than feeling overwhelmed by depression as a whole. The principle of interdependence also helps us understand how negative thought patterns become established and self-reinforcing. Traditional Buddhist psychology describes how an initial perception leads to feeling tones, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, which trigger habitual reactions of craving or aversion, which then strengthen certain thought patterns and weaken others. This process happens so quickly that we're usually unaware of it, but through mindful observation, we can begin to see it in action and intervene at various points. For example, someone with social anxiety might have the initial perception of people looking at them, which creates an unpleasant feeling tone, which triggers the habitual reaction of assuming negative judgment, which creates thoughts like, "They think I'm weird," which generates physical tension and discomfort, which reinforces the perception of threat. Understanding this chain of interdependent links allows them to question assumptions, introduce new perspectives, or work with physical sensations directly, rather than being helplessly caught in the full anxiety cycle. Buddhist psychology also emphasizes that our thoughts aren't direct reflections of reality, but constructions heavily influenced by our past experiences, current physical state, cultural conditioning, and many other factors. This understanding helps loosen the grip of negative thoughts by revealing their constructed nature. The thought, "I'm a failure," isn't an objective fact, but a mental construction dependent on how we selectively interpret events. What standards we're using for comparison, what aspects of experience we're attending to, and many other variables. Mindfulness practices help us see this construction process in action. Through careful observation, we might notice how a single negative event in the morning colors our interpretation of everything else that happens that day. Or we might observe how physical tiredness makes negative thoughts seem more convincing and positive ones less accessible. These insights help us take our thoughts less seriously without dismissing our genuine concerns. The interdependent nature of mind and body is another crucial aspect of this teaching. Buddhist traditions have always recognized what science now confirms, that mental and physical states deeply influence each other. Depressive thinking affects the body, creating fatigue, tension, or digestive issues. And these physical conditions in turn reinforce mental dullness or negativity. Understanding this mind-body connection opens additional avenues for working with difficult mental states through physical approaches like movement, breathing practices, or even simple changes in posture. Another powerful application of interdependence to negative thinking involves examining the wider contexts that shape our mental habits. Our thought patterns don't develop in isolation, but are influenced by family dynamics, cultural messages, economic conditions, and social environments. Recognizing these broader conditions helps reduce inappropriate self-blame for persistent negative thinking while identifying additional leverage points for change beyond individual psychology. For example, someone struggling with persistent feelings of inadequacy might benefit from examining cultural messages about success and productivity that contribute to these feelings. Or someone dealing with anxiety might recognize how news consumption or social media use is creating conditions for fearful thinking. This broader perspective doesn't replace personal practice, but complements it by addressing external conditions that maintain internal struggles. Buddhist interdependence teachings also reveal how our mental states affect others and how others' states affect us. We aren't isolated minds, but exist in webs of relationship where emotions and thoughts are constantly being transmitted and reinforced. This understanding can be leveraged for healing by intentionally surrounding ourselves with supportive people and communities while being mindful of how we contribute to collective emotional environments. Practical techniques for working with interdependence include charting or mapping the relationships between different aspects of our experience, noticing, for instance, how certain thoughts affect the body, how body states influence emotions, how emotions color perception, and so on. This process helps us identify key intervention points in our particular patterns of suffering. Another approach involves intentionally changing one element in the interdependent system and observing the effects. This might mean deliberately changing body posture, consciously introducing new thoughts, seeking different environments, or adjusting daily routines. Because everything is interconnected, changes in one area often create surprising shifts throughout the system of our experience. Perhaps most importantly, the principle of interdependence reveals that we don't need to transform our entire mental landscape at once. By working skillfully with key links in the chain of dependent origination, we can initiate changes that gradually affect the whole system. This makes the process of transformation more manageable and less overwhelming, offering hope even in the face of entrenched patterns of anxiety or depression. The beauty of combining scientific understanding with Buddhist wisdom lies in how they complement each other. Science provides empirical validation and mechanistic explanations for meditation's effectiveness, while Buddhist psychology offers a sophisticated framework for understanding the mind and practical techniques for transformation. together. They provide a comprehensive approach to mental health that addresses both immediate symptoms and deeper patterns, while understanding interdependence helps us see the complex web of factors that create suffering. Buddhist practice also emphasizes the active cultivation of positive mental qualities as antidotes to specific negative states. Two particularly powerful approaches involve developing compassion for addressing depression and learning skillful ways to work with anger that often accompanies anxiety. Compassion, or karuna in Pali, is often described as the heart's natural response to suffering, the wish for that suffering to be alleviated. It's distinct from pity, which looks down on others, and from empathic distress, which becomes overwhelmed by others' pain. True compassion combines clear recognition of suffering with the balanced strength to respond skillfully. While we often think of compassion as something we extend toward others, Buddhist practice recognizes that self-compassion is equally essential, particularly for those struggling with depression. Depression frequently involves a painful paradox: intense suffering combined with harsh self-judgment about that very suffering. Many people not only feel terrible but then criticize themselves for feeling that way, creating a secondary layer of suffering on top of the original pain. Thoughts like, "I shouldn't be so weak," or "What's wrong with me that I can't just be happy?" compound the depression, creating a spiral of self-criticism that deepens isolation and hopelessness. Self-compassion directly counters this pattern by bringing a kind, understanding awareness to one's own suffering. It begins with the simple acknowledgement that this is really hard right now, recognizing the legitimacy of one's pain without minimizing or exaggerating it. This validation alone can bring significant relief, as depression often involves feeling that one's suffering isn't valid or worthy of care. The practice continues with actively extending kindness toward oneself, the same way you might naturally respond to a dear friend in distress. This isn't about generating artificial positive feelings or pretending everything is fine. Rather, it's about treating yourself with the same basic decency you'd offer someone else who is struggling. This might involve gentle self-talk, soothing physical touch like placing a hand on your heart, or small acts of self-care that acknowledge your difficulties. Psychologist Kristin Neff, who has pioneered research on self-compassion in Western contexts, identifies three core components that align closely with Buddhist understandings: mindfulness, clearly seeing what's happening without avoidance or over-identification; common humanity, recognizing that suffering is part of the shared human experience, not a personal failing; and kindness, actively extending care toward oneself. Research on self-compassion shows remarkable benefits for people with depression. Higher levels of self-compassion are associated with lower levels of depression, anxiety, and rumination. Self-compassion practices have been shown to reduce self-criticism, increase feelings of social connectedness, and improve overall emotional resilience. From a neurobiological perspective, self-compassion activates the mammalian caregiving system, triggering the release of oxytocin and opiates that create feelings of safety and calm, directly countering the threat-focused state common in depression. One particularly powerful aspect of compassion practice for depression is how it addresses the intense isolation that often accompanies this condition. Depression tends to create a sense of disconnection, feeling cut off from others, fundamentally different, or uniquely flawed. These feelings lead to withdrawal, which further reinforces the isolation in a vicious cycle. Compassion practice interrupts this cycle by recognizing that suffering is universal, a basic part of human experience rather than evidence of personal deficiency. The traditional Buddhist practice of Tonglen, or sending and taking, works directly with this understanding. The practitioner visualizes breathing in the suffering of self and others, and breathing out relief and happiness, rather than trying to push away painful feelings. Tonglen involves moving towards suffering with an open heart, recognizing the shared nature of human pain. For someone with depression who feels alone in their struggle, This practice creates a profound sense of connection that can be transformative. Importantly, compassion in Buddhist practice isn't just a feeling, but also involves action. For someone with depression, compassionate action toward oneself might mean seeking appropriate treatment, establishing supportive routines, or setting boundaries with people or situations that deplete mental health. It might mean learning to say no to excessive demands or yes to things that nourish well-being. Compassionate action is not indulgent or enabling, but wise and kind, based on a clear understanding of what truly supports healing. The development of compassion also addresses the harsh inner critic that often drives depression. Many people with depression report a constant stream of self-critical thoughts, creating an internal environment of hostility and judgment. Through compassion practice, it's possible to gradually transform this inner relationship, developing an internal voice that's supportive and encouraging rather than condemning. This doesn't happen overnight, but develops through consistent practice and gentle persistence. For those whose depression includes feelings of worthlessness or the belief that they don't deserve compassion, Buddhist practice offers a different perspective. Rather than basing self-worth on achievements, appearance, or others' approval, the Buddhist view sees the capacity for compassion as innate, a natural quality of awareness that can be uncovered rather than something that needs to be earned. This perspective can be deeply healing for those whose depression involves feeling fundamentally flawed or undeserving of care. The practice of extending compassion to others also plays an important role in healing depression. When we're caught in depressive rumination, our attention becomes narrowly focused on our own pain in a way that actually intensifies suffering. By deliberately shifting attention to others' well-being and finding ways to contribute positively to their lives, we create a healthy counterbalance to self-focused rumination. This isn't about denying or suppressing our own pain, but about widening the lens to include others in our field of care. Research confirms the benefits of this outward focus, showing that acts of kindness and altruism activate reward centers in the brain, increase feelings of meaning and purpose, and improve mood, all valuable antidotes to depression. This aligns with the Buddhist understanding that our well-being is interdependent with others, not separate from it. Like all Buddhist practices, compassion is developed gradually through consistent training rather than arising fully formed, beginning with easier situations and extending to more challenging ones. Practitioners learn to expand their capacity for compassion while maintaining appropriate boundaries and self-care. This graduated approach makes the practice accessible even for those in the midst of significant depression. While compassion serves as a powerful antidote for the self-aversion and isolation of depression, Buddhist approaches also offer specific wisdom for working with the anger and irritability that often accompany anxiety. Though we don't often associate anxiety with anger, many people with anxiety disorders experience significant irritability, frustration, and even rage as part of their condition. Understanding and transforming these difficult emotions is an essential part of comprehensive anxiety treatment. Buddhist psychology offers a nuanced perspective on anger that differs significantly from many Western views. Rather than seeing anger as a sin to be avoided or a healthy emotion to be expressed, Buddhism recognizes anger as a complex mental state that arises from specific causes and conditions and can be worked with skillfully. The Buddha described anger as being like holding a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. You get burned first. This pragmatic focus on how anger affects us provides a practical starting point for transformation. The first step in Buddhist approaches to anger is simply developing greater awareness of how anger manifests in body and mind. For many people with anxiety, irritability can build so gradually that they're not aware of it until they've already been triggered into a full anger response. Mindfulness practice helps identify the earliest signs of anger, perhaps tension in the shoulders, heat in the face, or a quickening of thoughts, creating the possibility of responding skillfully before the emotion takes over. Through careful observation, it becomes possible to recognize the common triggers and patterns of angry reactions. Someone with anxiety might notice they become particularly irritable when they feel rushed, when they haven't slept well, or when they encounter uncertainty. This awareness alone creates space for intervention, allowing the person to take preemptive self-care measures or prepare mentally for challenging situations. Beyond simple awareness, Buddhist psychology identifies specific antidotes to anger. One powerful approach involves investigating the underlying causes beneath the surface emotion. Often, anger serves as a secondary emotion covering more vulnerable feelings like fear, hurt, or helplessness, all common experiences for people with anxiety. By gently exploring what's beneath this anger, or what am I really afraid of right now, it becomes possible to address the root causes rather than just managing the symptomatic anger. The practice of patience, Khanti in Pali, serves as a direct antidote to anger and irritability. This isn't passive endurance, but an active, strong quality of mind that can stay steady and clear even when provoked. For someone with anxiety-related irritability, cultivating patience involves gradually building the capacity to experience uncomfortable situations or emotions without immediately reacting. This might begin with small daily annoyances and gradually extend to more significant provocations. Loving-kindness meditation, which we discussed earlier as a general practice for emotional well-being, takes on special significance as an antidote to anger. By systematically developing goodwill toward oneself and others, this practice directly counters the ill will inherent in anger. For someone whose anxiety manifests as irritability or rage, regular loving-kindness practice can gradually shift the baseline emotional tone from hostility to friendliness. Buddhist approaches also emphasize understanding the relationship between expectations and anger. Much irritability stems from rigid expectations about how things should be. People should behave considerately. Plans should go smoothly. Life should be fair. When reality inevitably deviates from these expectations, anger arises as a protest against what is. For people with anxiety, who often have particularly strong needs for control and predictability, these expectation gaps can trigger significant anger. The antidote isn't to abandon all preferences or standards, but to hold them more lightly, with the flexibility to adapt when reality doesn't conform to our wishes. This is the middle way approach applied to expectations, neither rigidly demanding that everything meet our standards, nor passively accepting all behavior without discernment. Practical techniques for working with anxiety-related anger include breathing through the emotion rather than acting it out or suppressing it. This involves staying present with the physical sensations of anger while maintaining steady, calm breathing, allowing the emotional energy to be experienced and processed without harmful expression. Over time, this develops the capacity to tolerate strong emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Another approach involves wise reflection on the consequences of anger. Buddhist practice encourages examining questions like, if I express this anger, what will the likely outcome be? Will it help solve the actual problem or create new ones? How will I feel afterward? For someone whose anxiety manifests as irritability, this reflection can interrupt the impulsive reactions that often lead to regret and further anxiety. The Buddha also taught specific contemplations to counter habitual anger, such as reflecting on the good qualities of people who trigger our irritation, considering the universal nature of flawed behavior, including our own, and recalling the futility of maintaining anger over time. These reflections aren't meant to suppress justified concerns, but to prevent anger from becoming a destructive force in our lives and relationships. Importantly, Buddhist approaches distinguish between anger as an emotion and harmful actions that might stem from it. The goal isn't never to feel angry, an impossible and unhealthy standard, but to develop the capacity to experience anger without being controlled by it or causing harm because of it. This balanced perspective is particularly valuable for people with anxiety, who often judge themselves harshly for negative emotions, creating additional layers of distress. The transformation of anger is viewed as a gradual process involving many small choices over time, not a sudden elimination of the emotion. With consistent practice, people typically experience angry reactions becoming less intense, of shorter duration, and less likely to control their behavior. This progressive improvement offers hope while acknowledging the reality that deeply ingrained emotional patterns take time to change. For those whose anxiety and anger are rooted in past trauma, Buddhist practices are often most effective when combined with appropriate trauma-informed therapy. The complementary strengths of Buddhist emotional regulation techniques and modern trauma treatment can create a comprehensive approach that addresses both immediate symptoms and deeper causal factors. Working with anger is just one aspect of managing anxiety, but many people find that the most pervasive symptom they struggle with is chronic worry, that relentless mental projection into the future, constantly anticipating what might go wrong. This future-oriented thinking pattern forms the core of anxiety disorders, keeping the mind in a state of perpetual alertness and tension. Buddhism offers a powerful antidote to this tendency through present-moment awareness, the practice of deliberately bringing attention back to what's actually happening right now. The human mind has an extraordinary capacity to time travel mentally, leaving the present moment to revisit the past or project into the future. While this ability has evolutionary advantages, it becomes problematic when our attention is constantly pulled away from direct experience into abstract concerns about what might happen hours, days, or even years from now. For someone with anxiety, this mental time travel predominantly goes in one direction, forward into anticipated threats and problems. The Buddha recognized this tendency of the mind over 2,500 years ago, observing that much of our suffering comes not from what's actually happening, but from our resistance to what has already happened or our fears about what might happen. His solution was remarkably straightforward, yet profound: training the mind to fully inhabit the present moment, where peace is always available regardless of external circumstances. Present moment awareness differs from other anxiety management techniques in a fundamental way. Many conventional approaches try to change the content of worrying thoughts through techniques like challenging cognitive distortions or substituting positive thoughts for negative ones. While these approaches have value, they can sometimes reinforce the habit of dwelling in abstract thinking rather than returning to direct experience. Present moment awareness, by contrast, changes our relationship with thinking itself. When practicing present moment awareness, you're not trying to stop thoughts about the future or judge them as bad. Instead, you're developing the capacity to recognize when you've been carried away by thinking and to gently bring your attention back to what's actually happening in your immediate experience. This might be the physical sensations of breathing, the feeling of your feet on the ground, sounds in the environment, or any other aspect of current sensory reality. This practice directly counters the mental habits that maintain chronic worry. Anxiety perpetuates itself through a process of abstraction, taking us further and further from direct experience into layers of conceptual thinking about potential scenarios, interpretations of those scenarios, feelings about those interpretations, and on and on. Present moment awareness interrupts this proliferation by repeatedly anchoring attention in concrete, sensory reality. A simple but powerful present moment practice involves regularly asking yourself, what is happening right now? Not what might happen, or what does this mean? But simply, what am I actually experiencing in this moment? You might notice physical sensations, emotions, thoughts passing through, sounds, sights, whatever makes up your current experience. The key is bringing curious attention to what's actually here rather than what the anxious mind projects, neurologically. This practice activates very different brain networks than those involved in worry. Chronic anxiety is associated with high activity in the default mode network, brain regions that support self-referential thinking, rumination, and mind-wandering. Present moment awareness activates attention networks associated with direct perception and experiential processing. Over time, regular practice strengthens these direct experience networks while weakening the habitual activation of worry-based networks. One of the most liberating discoveries that comes through practicing present moment awareness is that right now is usually manageable. The anxious mind tends to bundle all possible future problems together, creating an overwhelming impression that everything is too much to handle. When attention returns to this moment, we often find that what's actually happening right now is workable. There might be some physical discomfort, some difficult emotions, some challenging thoughts, but in this moment, we're coping, we're breathing, we're here. The Buddha taught various anchors for present moment awareness to accommodate different temperaments and situations. The breath serves as a particularly effective anchor because it's always with us and naturally occurs in the present. You can't breathe in the past or future. Body sensations offer another powerful anchor, helping to counteract the disembodied quality of abstract worry with concrete physical awareness. For some people, sounds work well as an anchor because they naturally come and go, demonstrating the changing nature of experience. Daily activities provide endless opportunities to practice present moment awareness. Instead of brushing your teeth while mentally rehearsing worst-case scenarios for tomorrow's meeting, you can feel the brush against your teeth, taste the toothpaste, hear the sound of water running. While driving, instead of planning what you'll say in a difficult conversation, you can feel your hands on the wheel, notice the sensation of movement, see the road ahead. These aren't special meditation exercises, but ordinary moments reclaimed from the habit of worrying. Research has demonstrated that this kind of present-focused attention activates the parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest mode, which naturally counteracts the sympathetic arousal of anxiety. Regular practice of present moment awareness has been shown to reduce excessive stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that maintain the physiological state of anxiety. This creates a positive feedback loop. As the body becomes calmer, catastrophic thinking diminishes, which further calms the body. One common misconception about present moment awareness is that it means never planning or thinking about the future. This isn't the case at all. The difference is between conscious, purposeful thinking about the future when appropriate, versus being unconsciously hijacked by worry. Present moment awareness actually enhances our ability to plan effectively because it allows us to engage with future-oriented thinking from a place of calm clarity rather than fearful reactivity. For chronic worriers, one helpful approach is to set aside specific worry time, perhaps 15 or 20 minutes daily, when you deliberately consider concerns and make plans. Outside that designated time, when you notice worry arising, you can gently remind yourself, "I have time set aside for this later," and return attention to the present moment. This creates healthy boundaries around worry rather than letting it infiltrate every moment of the day. The practice of present moment awareness doesn't yield instant results, and this is important to understand. Our minds have typically spent decades strengthening the habit of chronic worry, so it takes consistent practice to establish new mental patterns. Many people report that when they begin practicing, they become more aware of just how frequently their minds leave the present, and this can initially feel discouraging. However, this increased awareness is actually progress, the necessary first step toward changing the habit. With regular practice, most people notice subtle shifts. Moments of genuine presence and peace become more frequent. Periods of worry become less intense or shorter in duration, and the capacity to return to the present when caught in worry develops more quickly. These incremental changes gradually transform the overall landscape of anxiety, creating more spaciousness and choice in how we relate to uncertain futures. The power of present moment awareness for relieving chronic worry lies in its direct approach to the root of anxiety, our tendency to live in anticipated futures rather than actual experience. By gently and repeatedly bringing attention back to what's happening right now, We gradually rewire our nervous systems and mental habits, creating the conditions for natural calm and clarity to emerge. While present moment awareness addresses the cognitive and physiological aspects of anxiety, Buddhist teachings also recognize the importance of how we live our lives, our actions, speech, and livelihood in creating the conditions for mental well-being. This is where Buddhist ethics, or sila, becomes relevant not as abstract moral rules but as practical guidelines for reducing anxiety and depression by living in alignment with our deepest values. Buddhist ethical principles aren't imposed commandments but observations about which kinds of actions lead to greater suffering or greater well-being. The Buddha encouraged his followers not to accept these principles on faith but to investigate for themselves how certain actions affect their own mental states and relationships. This investigative approach to ethics makes it particularly relevant for psychological healing. At the core of Buddhist ethics are 5 precepts or training principles: avoiding killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and using intoxicants. Rather than seeing these as rigid rules that make life more constrained, we can understand them as creating the conditions for psychological ease. When we live in ways that don't cause harm to ourselves or others, we naturally experience less remorse, fear, and inner conflict, all of which contribute to anxiety and depression. Many people with anxiety report that their symptoms intensify after interactions where they've spoken harshly, acted against their own values, or made choices they later regret. This isn't surprising from a Buddhist perspective. Our actions create immediate psychological consequences, not through supernatural punishment, but through the natural sensitivity of our own consciousness. Ethical conduct creates a foundation of safety in our relationship with ourselves. This relationship with ourselves is particularly important for people prone to harsh self-criticism and depression. When our actions align with our values, we naturally experience a sense of integrity and self-respect. This creates an internal environment where self-compassion can flourish more easily. Conversely, when we regularly act in ways that contradict our deeper values, we tend to disconnect from ourselves as a way to avoid the discomfort of this contradiction, creating the conditions for self-alienation and depression. The first ethical principle of non-harming extends beyond physical violence to include how we treat ourselves internally. Many people with depression maintain punishing inner dialogues, harsh self-judgment, and even self-destructive behaviors that violate this principle of non-harming. Practicing ethical restraint can mean refraining from these internal forms of violence just as much as external ones. When someone commits to not speaking to themselves in ways they wouldn't speak to a friend, they're applying this ethical principle as a form of psychological self-care. The precept regarding speech is particularly relevant for mental health. The Buddha described several kinds of unwise speech: false, divisive, harsh, and pointless or excessive talk. Each of these creates psychological complications. Dishonesty creates the stress of maintaining falsehoods and fear of being discovered. Divisive speech damages our sense of connection with others. Harsh speech activates stress responses in both speaker and listener. And excessive talking often involves rumination or worry, key features of anxiety and depression. By bringing mindful awareness to our speech patterns, we can identify habits that contribute to psychological suffering. Someone with social anxiety might notice they lie to avoid disapproval, creating additional stress. Someone with depression might observe how often they speak harshly about themselves or focus conversations on problems rather than possibilities. These insights create opportunities to adjust speech patterns in ways that support mental well-being. The ethical principle regarding intoxicants becomes especially significant when we consider how many people use alcohol, drugs, or other substances to self-medicate anxiety and depression. While these might provide temporary relief, they often worsen mental health conditions over time by disrupting sleep, altering brain chemistry, and preventing the development of more effective coping strategies. The Buddhist approach isn't necessarily about absolute abstinence, but about mindful awareness of how substances affect our mental clarity and emotional stability. Beyond the 5 basic precepts, Buddhist ethics encompasses positive qualities to be cultivated, like generosity, kindness, and truthfulness. Research in positive psychology confirms that actively practicing these qualities reliably increases well-being and reduces symptoms of depression and anxiety. Acts of generosity activate reward centers in the brain, create positive social feedback, and counteract the self-focused rumination characteristic of depression. Kindness reduces the social isolation that often accompanies mental health challenges. Truthfulness simplifies our lives and reduces the cognitive load of maintaining pretenses. Buddhist ethics also extends to our relationship with work and material resources, areas that frequently trigger anxiety and depression in modern life. The principle of right livelihood encourages finding work that doesn't harm others and ideally contributes positively to the world. While economic realities sometimes limit our immediate choices, even small shifts toward more ethical work can reduce the internal conflict that arises from violating our values daily. Similarly, Buddhist teachings on contentment and the middle way between indulgence and deprivation offer a balanced approach to material life. Many people experience significant anxiety around finances, possessions, and status. The constant pressure to acquire more creates a baseline of dissatisfaction, while fear of losing what we have generates ongoing stress. Practicing intentional simplicity and gratitude for what's already present can significantly reduce these sources of anxiety. What makes Buddhist ethics particularly relevant for mental health is its emphasis on intention rather than rigid adherence to rules. The focus isn't on perfect behavior, but on developing greater awareness of the relationship between our actions and our mental states. This creates a compassionate, growth-oriented approach rather than another source of self-criticism or shame when we inevitably fall short of ideals. For someone recovering from depression or anxiety, gradually aligning actions with values provides a concrete path toward greater self-respect and peace of mind. Each small choice to act with greater kindness, honesty, or restraint becomes a step toward rebuilding trust with oneself. Over time, this accumulated self-trust creates a solid foundation for psychological healing and growth. Building upon these ethical foundations, Buddhism offers deeper psychological tools for navigating the intense emotional experiences common in anxiety and depression. As we align our actions with our values, we create the conditions for developing more advanced mental qualities. 2 particularly powerful qualities for working with difficult emotions are equanimity and understanding the concept of non-self, both offering profound relief from psychological suffering. Equanimity, or upekkha in Pali, is often described as a balanced state of mind, not to be confused with indifference or apathy. True equanimity combines clear awareness with emotional stability, allowing us to remain steady amidst changing circumstances and fluctuating feelings. For people struggling with anxiety or depression, whose emotional lives often feel like unpredictable roller coasters, developing equanimity can be transformative. What makes equanimity particularly relevant for mental health challenges is that it doesn't require eliminating difficult emotions. Instead, it changes our relationship to those emotions, creating a more spacious container for experiencing them without being overwhelmed. Someone with equanimity can feel anxiety, sadness, or fear without these emotions taking over their entire consciousness or driving reactive behavior. The Buddha described equanimity as one of the 4 divine abodes or positive mental states worth cultivating, alongside loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy. While the other qualities respond appropriately to different situations, compassion responds to suffering, loving kindness to beings in general, sympathetic joy to happiness and success. Equanimity provides the balanced foundation that prevents these responses from becoming excessive or draining. For someone with anxiety, Equanimity develops the capacity to experience uncertainty and potential threats without spiraling into panic or excessive worry, rather than frantically trying to control everything or collapsing into helplessness. The anxious mind gradually learns to stay present and balanced even when outcomes are unknown. This doesn't mean ignoring real dangers or neglecting appropriate preparation, but rather responding from clarity instead of fear. For someone with depression, equanimity provides a middle path between suppressing difficult emotions and being consumed by them. Many people with depression swing between these extremes, either trying to numb or escape their painful feelings or becoming completely identified with hopelessness and despair. Equanimity allows for acknowledging sadness, grief, or disappointment without assuming these states define who you are or will last forever. One traditional Buddhist practice for developing equanimity involves contemplating the truth that all beings experience the results of their own actions. While we can offer support and care to others, ultimately we cannot live their lives for them or control their choices. This understanding helps release the excessive sense of responsibility that often accompanies anxiety and the self-blame common in depression. We can care deeply without carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. Another approach to developing equanimity focuses on working with the 8 worldly concerns or conditions: gain and loss, pleasure and pain, praise and blame, fame and disrepute. Our minds naturally grasp at the positive sides of these pairs while pushing away the negative sides, creating constant emotional turbulence as conditions inevitably change. Equanimity practice involves recognizing how we react to these changing conditions and gradually developing more balance in our responses. For example, someone with social anxiety might be extremely sensitive to praise and blame, feeling elated when receiving positive feedback but devastated by criticism. Through equanimity practice, they learn to value feedback without their self-worth becoming dependent on others' opinions. Similarly, someone with depression might over-identify with experiences of loss or failure. Equanimity helps them recognize that these experiences, while painful, don't define their entire life or permanent worth. Modern psychology confirms the value of equanimity, though it might use different terminology. Emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and psychological flexibility all describe aspects of what Buddhist tradition calls equanimity. Research shows that people with these qualities experience greater well-being and resilience even when facing significant life challenges, exactly what the Buddha observed centuries ago. Practically speaking, equanimity can be developed through both formal meditation and daily life practice. In meditation, you might deliberately expose yourself to thoughts or images that typically trigger mild emotional reactions, practicing maintaining awareness and balance rather than getting caught in automatic responses. As this capacity strengthens, you can gradually work with more challenging triggers. In daily life, equanimity practice might involve noticing when you're becoming emotionally reactive, perhaps when receiving criticism, facing an uncertain outcome, or experiencing a disappointment, and deliberately bringing attention to physical sensations while maintaining a broader perspective. Rather than immediately acting from the reactive emotion, you create space to respond with greater wisdom. Equanimity also develops through deliberately exposing ourselves to different perspectives. Many anxiety and depression symptoms worsen when we become fixated on a single narrative or interpretation. By regularly considering alternative viewpoints or imagining how situations might look 5 years from now, we loosen the grip of narrow, fear-based thinking and cultivate a more balanced perspective. One common misconception about equanimity is that it means not caring or becoming emotionally flat. True equanimity actually allows for deeper, more genuine emotional engagement because we're not constantly protecting ourselves from potential pain or chasing after pleasant states. When we're not afraid of our emotions, we can experience them more fully while maintaining inner stability. For someone with anxiety or depression, developing equanimity takes time and patience. Progress often isn't linear, You might experience growing equanimity in some situations while still feeling overwhelmed in others. The key is continuing the practice, noticing small improvements, and bringing compassion to the process rather than expecting immediate perfection. As equanimity develops, many people report a growing sense of inner freedom. They still experience the full range of human emotions, but they're no longer tyrannized by these feelings. Anxiety still arises but doesn't control their choices. Sadness comes but doesn't define their identity. This growing emotional freedom creates the foundation for authentic engagement with life beyond the limitations of anxiety and depression. The development of equanimity naturally leads to questions about who or what is experiencing all these changing mental and emotional states. This brings us to one of Buddhism's most profound and potentially liberating insights: the concept of non-self, or anatta in Pali. While this teaching can initially seem abstract or even threatening, when properly understood, it offers remarkable implications for mental health. The basic insight of anatta is that what we experience as a solid, permanent, independent self is actually a process rather than a fixed entity. The sense of being a separate self that owns experiences, makes decisions, and remains constant through time is a mental construction rather than an ultimate reality. This doesn't mean we don't exist, but that we exist in a different way than our usual assumptions suggest. For someone struggling with anxiety or depression, this teaching addresses one of the most painful aspects of these conditions: the way they become entangled with our sense of identity. Thoughts like, "I am an anxious person," or "I am depressed," suggest these states define who we fundamentally are, as if they were permanent features of an unchanging self. This identification intensifies suffering and creates a sense of hopelessness about the possibility of change. The Buddha observed that we construct our sense of self by identifying with 5 aspects of experience: physical form, feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, perceptions, mental formations, including thoughts and emotions, and consciousness itself. We string together these changing elements into a narrative of me and my experience that we then take to be solid and real. This process happens so automatically that we rarely question it. Through mindfulness practice, we can begin to observe this process of self-construction in action. We might notice how the thought, "I'm such a failure," arises, triggers unpleasant feelings in the body, leads to perceptions that filter for evidence of failure, generates more negative thoughts, and creates a convincing experience of being a failure, when in reality, each component of this experience is in constant flux, arising and passing in dependence on conditions. For someone with depression, seeing through this process of self-construction can be profoundly liberating. The solid identity of being depressed begins to dissolve into a recognition of changing mental and physical events that come and go based on conditions. This doesn't deny the very real experience of depression, but shifts the relationship to it from "this is who I am" to "these are experiences arising temporarily based on certain conditions." Similarly, someone with anxiety might recognize how the anxious self they've identified with is actually a composite of physical sensations like a racing heart, perceptions focused on potential threats, thoughts about what might go wrong, and awareness of all these elements. None of these components is permanent, and none constitutes a fixed anxious self that defines their identity. This insight doesn't mean dismissing or minimizing genuine psychological suffering. On the contrary, it allows for working more effectively with specific components of difficult experiences rather than feeling overwhelmed by a global, identity-level problem. Instead of thinking "I'm broken" or "something's fundamentally wrong with me," you might recognize there are thought patterns and physiological responses happening right now that contribute to suffering, and these can be addressed individually. The teaching of non-self also reveals how our sense of identity is shaped by cultural messages, family dynamics, and personal history, not by some intrinsic, unchangeable essence. This understanding creates freedom to question limiting self-concepts that fuel anxiety and depression. If you weren't born an anxious person but developed certain patterns based on experiences and conditions, then different conditions and experiences can facilitate different patterns. Modern psychotherapy approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy (ACT) draw on similar insights, using techniques like cognitive diffusion to help people recognize that they are not their thoughts. When someone can see the thought, "I'm worthless," as "I'm having the thought that I'm worthless," they create crucial distance that prevents complete identification with that mental event. This is the therapeutic application of the non-self insight. One particularly powerful aspect of this teaching for mental health is how it addresses the common experience of feeling like an imposter, the sense that beneath our functional public persona lies a defective, real self that others would reject if they knew the truth. The non-self teaching suggests that there is no fixed, real self hiding beneath our interactions, just ongoing processes of thinking, feeling, and behaving that change based on conditions. This can relieve the exhausting pressure to conceal a defective true self that doesn't actually exist in the way we imagine. From the perspective of non-self, recovery from anxiety or depression isn't about fixing a broken self or becoming a better self, but about recognizing the fluid, changeable nature of experience and working skillfully with its components. This shifts the focus from global self-evaluation, "Am I getting better or worse?" to specific attention to changing patterns and conditions. This more granular approach often feels more manageable and leads to more effective interventions. Of course, the concept of non-self can initially feel threatening, especially in Western cultures that place such emphasis on developing and expressing personal identity. People sometimes worry that without a solid sense of self, they would become passive or unable to function in daily life. However, the Buddhist teaching doesn't deny conventional selfhood or the practical need for a functioning sense of identity. It simply points to the constructed, conditional nature of that identity, freeing us from taking it to be more solid or permanent than it actually is. For someone recovering from anxiety or depression, insights into non-self typically develop gradually through practice rather than through intellectual understanding alone. As mindfulness strengthens, you naturally begin to observe how the sense of a solid self is constructed moment by moment, and how identification with certain thoughts or emotions as me or mine creates additional suffering beyond the original experience. This observation itself begins to loosen the grip of limiting self-concepts that maintain psychological distress. As we explore these deeper aspects of Buddhist psychology, it's important to remember that these teachings are meant to be practical, not just philosophical. The Buddha always emphasized direct experience over abstract theory. This practical approach is especially evident in Buddhist breathing techniques, which provide immediate tools for anxiety relief while supporting the development of qualities like equanimity and non-self-awareness. Conscious breathing stands as one of Buddhism's most accessible and effective practices for addressing anxiety. The breath occupies a unique position in human experience. It functions automatically but can also be consciously controlled, creating a bridge between involuntary bodily processes and intentional action. This makes it an ideal tool for influencing our nervous system and emotional states. The relationship between breath and anxiety is bidirectional. When we're anxious, our breathing typically becomes shallow, rapid, and irregular, often shifting from the diaphragm to the chest. This breathing pattern sends signals of danger to the brain, activating the sympathetic fight or flight response, which in turn creates more anxiety. Conscious breathing techniques interrupt this cycle by deliberately changing breathing patterns, which sends safety signals to the brain and activates the parasympathetic rest and digest response. One of the simplest and most effective Buddhist breathing practices is called anapanasati, or mindfulness of breathing, in its basic form. This practice involves simply bringing attention to the natural sensation of breathing without trying to control or change it. Even this simple awareness can begin to naturally regulate breathing patterns that have become disturbed by anxiety. As attention settles on the breath, many people notice their breathing automatically deepens and slows, bringing a corresponding sense of calm. For more immediate anxiety relief, Buddhist traditions also teach intentional breathing techniques that actively regulate the nervous system. One such approach is diaphragmatic or belly breathing, where you deliberately breathe deeply into the lower lungs, causing the abdomen to expand on inhalation and contract on exhalation. This activates the diaphragm fully and maximizes oxygen exchange while triggering parasympathetic relaxation responses. Another powerful technique is extended exhalation, where you make your out-breath longer than your in-breath. For example, you might inhale for a count of 4 and exhale for a count of 6 or 8. This extended exhalation strongly activates the vagus nerve, which is the primary pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system. Even a few minutes of breathing with extended exhalations can significantly reduce anxiety symptoms during stressful situations. Buddhist traditions from various cultures have developed specific breathing practices for emotional regulation. In Tibetan Buddhism, vase breathing involves gentle breath retention after inhalation, creating a slight pressure in the abdomen that grounds attention in the body and calms mental agitation. In some Zen traditions, practitioners count breaths, typically from 1 to 10, as an anchor for attention that interrupts anxious thought patterns. For someone experiencing a panic attack or acute anxiety, the 4-7-8 breathing technique adapted from yogic pranayama can be particularly helpful. This involves inhaling quietly through the nose for a count of 4, holding the breath for a count of 7, and exhaling completely through the mouth for a count of 8. This pattern rapidly down-regulates the nervous system and can interrupt the escalation of panic symptoms. What makes these breathing techniques particularly valuable is that they're always available. You don't need special equipment, environments, or extensive training to use them. You can practice conscious breathing while sitting in a meeting, standing in line, or lying in bed at night. This accessibility makes them ideal first response tools for anxiety management. Buddhist breathing practices are also valuable for addressing the physical symptoms of anxiety like muscle tension, racing heart, or digestive distress. By directing the breath mentally toward areas of physical discomfort or tension, you can bring oxygen and awareness to these regions, often facilitating release and relaxation. This technique, sometimes called breathing into difficult sensations, combines physiological benefits with the psychological benefit of approaching rather than avoiding uncomfortable feelings. Modern scientific research has validated these ancient breathing practices, documenting their effects on heart rate variability, cortisol levels, immune function, and brain activity. Studies show that regular conscious breathing practice not only provides immediate anxiety relief, but also creates lasting changes in stress reactivity and emotional regulation capacity. Research on mindfulness-based interventions consistently finds that breathing awareness is one of the most helpful components for anxiety reduction. The effectiveness of breathing techniques for anxiety makes sense from both Buddhist psychological and modern neuroscientific perspectives. Anxiety involves excessive activity in brain regions associated with threat detection and future projection, coupled with reduced activity in regions involved in bodily awareness and present moment processing. Conscious breathing directly counters this imbalance by anchoring attention in present moment bodily sensation while activating neurological relaxation responses. From a Buddhist perspective, breathing practices serve multiple levels of purpose simultaneously. At the most immediate level, they calm the nervous system and interrupt anxious thinking. At a deeper level, they develop concentration and present moment awareness that form the foundation for insight. And at the most profound level, they provide a direct experience of the changing, impermanent nature of all phenomena, including anxiety itself. For someone beginning to work with Buddhist breathing techniques, It's helpful to establish a regular daily practice during relatively calm periods, not just during anxiety episodes. This develops the skill so it's more accessible during difficult moments. Starting with just 5 minutes of daily breathing practice can build the foundation for this valuable skill. Many people find it helpful to practice at consistent times, perhaps first thing in the morning or before bed, to establish the habit more easily. As valuable as formal breathing practice is, the real power comes from integrating conscious breathing into daily life. This might involve taking 3 conscious breaths before answering the phone, pausing for a deep breath at stoplights, or establishing a habit of breathing mindfully while waiting in lines. These small practices help maintain nervous system regulation throughout the day, preventing anxiety from building to overwhelming levels. While conscious breathing creates a foundation of physiological calm essential for addressing anxiety, many people find that tension and stress still accumulate in the body over time. This is where the Buddhist practice of body scan meditation becomes an invaluable complement to breathing techniques. The body scan offers a systematic approach to releasing physical tension that often stores and perpetuates emotional distress. Body scan meditation has roots in ancient Buddhist practices of mindfulness of the body, Kayanupassana, one of the 4 foundations of mindfulness taught by the Buddha. While various traditions have developed different approaches, the essential practice involves systematically moving attention through the body, bringing mindful awareness to sensations in each region without trying to change or judge what's found. The practice typically begins with bringing attention to one part of the body, often the feet or the top of the head, and then gradually moving through the entire body, section by section. During this process, you simply notice whatever sensations are present: warmth, coolness, pressure, tingling, tension, relaxation, or even the absence of sensation. There's no goal to achieve or specific feeling to create, just honest attention to what's actually happening in your direct experience. This simple but powerful practice addresses several key aspects of anxiety and depression. First, it counteracts the common tendency to disconnect from bodily sensations during emotional distress. Many people with anxiety develop habits of dissociation, leaving them feeling disconnected from their bodies and overly identified with racing thoughts. The body scan re-establishes a healthy relationship with physical experience, grounding awareness in the concrete rather than the conceptual. Second, the practice reveals how emotions manifest physically and where we tend to store tension. Someone might discover that anxiety creates tightness in their shoulders, a knot in their stomach, or a constricted feeling in their throat. Depression might appear as heaviness in the chest, lethargy in the limbs, or a collapsed feeling in the posture. Recognizing these physical manifestations provides concrete access points for working with emotions that might otherwise feel overwhelming or abstract. Third, the body scan develops the capacity to be present with uncomfortable sensations without immediately reacting to them or trying to fix them. This directly counters the avoidance that often perpetuates anxiety and the helplessness that deepens depression. By staying present with difficult sensations, you discover that they're workable, they change, they come and go, they have edges and contours rather than being all-consuming. For people with anxiety, the body scan offers a way to recognize early warning signs of escalating stress before they become overwhelming. Regular practice develops sensitivity to subtle tensions that signal the beginning of an anxiety response, creating the opportunity for early intervention. Someone might notice their jaw clenching or their breathing becoming shallow and take steps to regulate their system before full anxiety develops. For those with depression, the body scan counters the numbness and disconnection that often accompany the condition. By systematically bringing attention to physical sensations throughout the body, the practice reawakens sensitivity and connection to physical experience. It can also reveal pockets of held emotion that contribute to depressive states when left unprocessed or unacknowledged. Modern adaptations of the body scan have been incorporated into several evidence-based interventions, including mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT. Research on these approaches shows that the body scan contributes to reduced symptoms of anxiety and depression, improved sleep quality, and decreased physical pain. It's particularly effective as part of comprehensive treatment approaches that also address cognitive and behavioral aspects of mental health. From a neurological perspective, the body scan activates brain regions associated with interoception, the awareness of internal bodily states. Strengthening these networks helps counterbalance the excessive activity in regions associated with self-referential thinking and rumination that characterize both anxiety and depression. The practice essentially helps rebalance brain function away from abstract worry or rumination and toward present-moment embodied awareness. The body scan can be practiced in various positions, lying down, sitting, or even standing, making it adaptable to different circumstances and needs. For beginners, lying down often provides the most support for full relaxation, though this position may lead to sleepiness for some practitioners. Sitting offers a good balance of alertness and ease, while standing brings more awareness to posture and weight distribution. For someone beginning the practice, guided body scans can be particularly helpful. Having someone else's voice direct attention through the body allows the practitioner to focus completely on sensing rather than remembering what comes next. Many free recordings are available online, ranging from 10 minutes to 45 minutes in length, making the practice accessible to anyone with internet access. Like breathing practices, the body scan becomes most valuable when incorporated into daily life beyond formal meditation sessions. This might involve taking brief body check-ins throughout the day, pausing to notice areas of tension during stressful situations, or developing awareness of how emotional states manifest physically in real time. This integration helps prevent the accumulation of tension that can trigger or worsen anxiety and depression. For those with trauma histories, it's important to approach body scan practice with appropriate support and modifications. Trauma often disrupts our relationship with bodily sensations, making direct awareness potentially overwhelming. Working with a trauma-informed meditation teacher or therapist can help develop an approach that gradually builds capacity for embodied awareness without re-traumatization. The complementary nature of conscious breathing and body scan practices creates a powerful toolkit for addressing both immediate anxiety symptoms and accumulated tension or stress. Breathing techniques offer rapid regulation for the nervous system, while the body scan provides a more thorough release of stored tension. Together, they address both acute and chronic aspects of anxiety and depression while developing the foundation of embodied awareness essential for deeper healing work. As we develop greater awareness of our bodies through these practices, we naturally begin to notice something important about our experience: the relationship between our actions and our happiness. This brings us to one of Buddhism's most practical insights: the distinction between genuine happiness and temporary pleasure, a understanding that's particularly relevant for people struggling with anxiety and depression. The Buddha was deeply concerned with happiness. Unlike some religious traditions that focus primarily on morality or devotion, Buddhism places the end of suffering and the cultivation of genuine well-being at the center of its practice. But the Buddha made a crucial distinction that modern psychology is only now beginning to fully appreciate. Not all forms of happiness are created equal, and some types of happiness are more reliable and sustainable than others. In Pali, the language of the earliest Buddhist texts, there are several words that get translated as happiness in English, but they point to very different experiences. Sukha refers to a deep, stable sense of contentment and well-being, while piti might be translated as momentary joy or rapture. The Buddha wasn't against pleasure. He recognized it as part of a natural, healthy life, but he observed that when people mistake temporary pleasure for true happiness, they create patterns that actually increase suffering in the long run. This insight is particularly relevant for those dealing with anxiety and depression. Many common coping mechanisms for these conditions involve seeking immediate relief or pleasure: comfort eating, excessive screen time, substance use, compulsive shopping, or other behaviors that provide a quick dopamine hit. While these might offer temporary escape from difficult feelings, they often leave us feeling worse afterward and don't address the underlying causes of our suffering. The Buddha identified several levels of happiness, each more stable and less dependent on external conditions than the last. The most basic level is sensory pleasure, the enjoyment of pleasant sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and physical sensations. This form of happiness is legitimate but inherently unstable, since sensory experiences constantly change and the pleasure they provide quickly fades, often leading to craving for more. A deeper form of happiness comes from states of mental concentration or flow, where the mind becomes fully absorbed in an activity or meditation practice. This happiness is less dependent on external conditions and more on the quality of attention itself. Many people with anxiety or depression report that activities that create this state of absorption, whether creative pursuits, physical exercise, or formal meditation, provide relief that lasts longer than mere sensory pleasure. Deeper still is the happiness that comes from cultivating positive mental states like generosity, kindness, and compassion. This type of happiness isn't dependent on getting anything but comes from giving and connecting with others. Research confirms what the Buddha taught, that acts of kindness boost mood more effectively and sustainably than self-focused pleasure-seeking. For people with depression, whose condition often involves excessive self-focus and rumination, this outward focus can be particularly therapeutic. The deepest form of happiness in Buddhist psychology comes from wisdom and insight, from seeing clearly the nature of experience and developing freedom from the mental patterns that create unnecessary suffering. This happiness isn't dependent on conditions being a certain way, but comes from a profound shift in how we relate to whatever conditions arise. It manifests as a sense of inner peace that remains accessible even during difficult circumstances. For someone with anxiety or depression, this perspective offers a different approach to happiness than what's often promoted in consumer culture. Rather than chasing ever-changing pleasurable experiences or trying to arrange perfect external conditions, Buddhist practice focuses on developing internal qualities that allow for well-being even when conditions aren't ideal. This doesn't mean accepting abusive situations or unnecessary hardship, but it does mean not placing all our hopes for happiness on circumstances beyond our control. Modern research in positive psychology supports this Buddhist perspective. Studies show that activities like expressing gratitude, developing strengths, and cultivating positive relationships contribute more to sustained well-being than acquiring possessions or having pleasurable experiences. Researchers distinguish between hedonic well-being, based on pleasure and positive emotions, and eudaimonic well-being, based on meaning, purpose, and growth, a distinction that parallels the Buddha's teachings about different levels of happiness. Interestingly, studies also show that pursuing happiness directly often backfires, making people less happy. The more we grasp at feeling good, the more elusive it becomes. This confirms the Buddha's observation that craving, even for positive states, creates suffering. True happiness comes not from desperately seeking positive experiences, but from relating wisely to whatever experiences arise. For someone with depression, this can be particularly liberating. Depression often involves feeling that you're somehow failing because you can't feel happy, creating a spiral of self-criticism that deepens the depression. The Buddhist perspective suggests that happiness isn't something you either have or don't have, but a capacity that can be gradually cultivated through specific practices, regardless of your starting point. Similarly, for someone with anxiety, the distinction between different types of happiness offers valuable guidance. Anxiety often drives us to seek control and certainty as conditions for feeling okay. The Buddhist approach suggests developing internal resources that allow for ease even amid uncertainty, focusing on what's actually within our control, our relationship to experience, rather than trying to control all external variables. One practical application of this teaching involves becoming more discerning about the types of happiness we pursue. When feeling anxious or depressed, we might ask ourselves, will this action bring temporary relief but long-term problems, or is it contributing to deeper well-being? This doesn't mean never enjoying sensory pleasures, but being wise about which forms of happiness we prioritize and depend upon. Another application involves intentionally cultivating the deeper forms of happiness through specific practices. Meditation develops the happiness of concentration and mental calm. Generosity and service create the happiness of positive connection. Mindful investigation cultivates the happiness of wisdom and insight. By regularly engaging in these practices, we develop sources of well-being less vulnerable to changing external conditions. Perhaps most importantly, the Buddhist perspective on happiness reminds us that well-being isn't an achievement to reach, but an ongoing practice. There's no perfect state to arrive at where we'll never feel difficult emotions again. Instead, happiness becomes our capacity to be present with the full range of human experience with less resistance and greater wisdom. This view offers sustainable hope for people with anxiety and depression, not the false hope of never struggling again, but the realistic hope of relating to struggle in a way that creates less suffering. While these Buddhist insights about happiness offer valuable individual practices, the Buddha also emphasized that the path to well-being isn't meant to be walked alone. This brings us to another crucial aspect of Buddhist practice for mental health: the role of community, or Sangha, in supporting healing and growth. The Buddha recognized that human beings are inherently social creatures, and our mental health is deeply interconnected with our social relationships. In Buddhist tradition, the Sangha, the community of practitioners, is considered one of the three jewels, or refuges, alongside the Buddha, the example of awakening, and the Dharma, the teachings and practices. This emphasis on community wasn't incidental, but reflected the Buddha's understanding that transformation happens most effectively in supportive social contexts. He recognized something modern psychology confirms: isolation tends to amplify suffering, while healthy connection promotes healing. For people with depression, the value of community can't be overstated. Depression typically involves a painful paradox. When we most need connection, we often feel least able to reach out and engage with others. The condition creates a sense of isolation and disconnection, which then reinforces the depression in a vicious cycle. Symptoms like low energy, negative self-perception, and anhedonia, inability to feel pleasure, make social interactions seem overwhelming or pointless, leading to withdrawal that deepens the sense of being alone with your pain. Buddhist community practice directly addresses this cycle by creating structures for connection that don't depend entirely on how you feel in the moment. Regular group meditation, classes, or service activities provide opportunities to be with others even during difficult periods. Unlike some social contexts that emphasize performance or achievement, traditional Buddhist communities focus on presence and authenticity, creating space for people to show up as they actually are rather than having to pretend to be okay. For someone with anxiety, especially social anxiety, community practice offers a different kind of benefit. Anxiety often involves excessive self-consciousness and worry about others' judgments. The structured nature of Buddhist community activities provides clear roles and expectations that can reduce uncertainty, while the values of compassion and non-judgment create a safer environment for gradual exposure to social interaction. Many people with social anxiety find that purpose-driven activities focused on practice or service feel more manageable than purely social events. Research in social psychology and neuroscience strongly supports the importance of community for mental health. Studies show that social isolation is as significant a risk factor for premature mortality as smoking 15 cigarettes daily, more impactful than obesity or sedentary lifestyle. Conversely, strong social connections correlate with lower rates of depression and anxiety, better immune function, and greater resilience during stress. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Our ancestors relied on social groups for survival, so our nervous systems are designed to function optimally in conditions of safe connection. What makes Buddhist community practice particularly valuable for mental health is its emphasis on specific qualities of relationship. Unlike some social environments that may reinforce unhealthy patterns, traditional Buddhist communities emphasize values like honesty, non-harming, generosity, and compassion. They create contexts for what psychologists call secure attachment, relationships characterized by consistency, care, and respect for boundaries. For people whose mental health challenges stem partly from early relationship patterns, these communities can provide corrective emotional experiences. Buddhist sanghas also provide something essential for anyone dealing with mental health challenges: the normalization of struggle. When we're surrounded by people who appear to have perfect lives, especially in the curated world of social media, our own difficulties can feel like personal failures or abnormalities. In healthy practice communities, there's open acknowledgement that everyone faces challenges, making it safer to be authentic about struggles rather than hiding them behind a facade of okayness. The community also provides essential feedback and reflection that help us see our blind spots and habitual patterns. Depression and anxiety typically involve distorted perceptions and thinking patterns that can be difficult to recognize from within. Trusted community members can gently reflect these patterns back to us, not as criticism, but as supportive feedback that aids in greater self-awareness. This function of mirroring is something Buddhist communities have provided for centuries, long before modern psychology formalized it as a therapeutic technique. For those in the depths of depression or acute anxiety, formal treatment with mental health professionals remains essential. Buddhist community practice complements rather than replaces appropriate medical and psychological care. Many people find that the combination of professional treatment and supportive community creates the most effective conditions for recovery, with each addressing different aspects of well-being. Building supportive community isn't always easy, especially for those already struggling with mental health challenges. Many people with anxiety or depression find themselves in a catch-22. They need connection to heal, but their condition makes it difficult to create that connection. Buddhist traditions offer practical approaches to this dilemma, suggesting starting with small, manageable steps rather than overwhelming social commitments. This might mean beginning with a single trusted relationship, perhaps with a teacher or more experienced practitioner who can provide individual guidance. It might mean participating in structured group activities where the focus is on shared practice rather than social performance. It might mean finding online communities that allow for connection with reduced anxiety about in-person interaction. The key is finding entry points that feel workable given your current capacity while gradually expanding your comfort zone. Some Buddhist communities offer specific practices designed to develop interpersonal skills and comfort with connection. Practices like insight dialogue combine meditation with structured interpersonal communication, allowing practitioners to bring mindful awareness to the experience of being with others. Loving kindness practices directed toward fellow community members help develop positive mental habits that counteract the negative perceptions common in anxiety and depression. The Buddha taught that admirable friendship, surrounding yourself with people who embody positive qualities and support your growth, is not just a nice addition to practice, but essential to the path of transformation. For those dealing with anxiety and depression, this teaching offers both validation of how important social connection is for healing and practical guidance for cultivating relationships that support rather than undermine mental health. The support of community provides a powerful foundation for healing, but many people also benefit from more targeted approaches to mental health. This brings us to an important consideration: how Buddhist practices can be integrated with modern psychotherapy to create comprehensive treatment approaches that address both immediate symptoms and deeper patterns. This integration represents one of the most promising developments in mental health care over the past few decades. the relationship between Buddhism and Western psychology has evolved significantly over time. When these traditions first began interacting in the early 20th century, they were often viewed as separate and sometimes contradictory approaches. Western psychology, with its focus on strengthening the ego and self-concept, seemed at odds with Buddhist emphasis on non-self and letting go of fixed identity. However, as both fields have matured, practitioners and researchers have discovered profound complementarity between these traditions, each offering valuable perspectives and techniques the other might lack. Modern psychotherapy excels at understanding developmental history, working with trauma, addressing relationship patterns, and modifying harmful cognitive processes. Buddhism offers sophisticated techniques for training attention, cultivating positive mental states, developing metacognitive awareness, and understanding the deeper nature of mind and experience. Together, they provide tools for addressing both the specific manifestations of anxiety and depression and their underlying causes. The most well-known integration of Buddhist practices with modern psychotherapy is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, developed specifically for preventing depression relapse. MBCT combines traditional mindfulness meditation practices with elements of cognitive therapy, helping participants recognize early signs of depressive relapse and respond skillfully before being pulled into full episodes. Research shows that MBCT reduces relapse rates by approximately 40% for people with 3 or more previous episodes of depression, making it as effective as maintenance antidepressant medication for many people. Another important integration is dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, which incorporates mindfulness skills alongside other techniques for emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. Originally developed for borderline personality disorder, DBT has proven effective for a range of conditions involving emotional dysregulation, including depression and anxiety disorders. The dialectical approach, balancing acceptance and change, mirrors the Buddhist middle way between extremes of passive resignation and aggressive striving. Acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, represents another successful integration, drawing on Buddhist concepts like non-attachment and present-moment awareness while using modern behavioral science to help people take value-directed action even amid difficult thoughts and feelings. ACT's emphasis on psychological flexibility, being able to contact the present moment fully while choosing behavior based on values rather than automatic reactions, resonates deeply with Buddhist perspectives on freedom from conditioned patterns. Internal Family Systems Therapy, IFS, shares interesting parallels with Buddhist psychology, viewing the mind as composed of various parts or subpersonalities while recognizing an underlying awareness, called self in IFS, that can relate to these parts with curiosity and compassion. This model provides a bridge between Western psychological concepts of the fragmented self and Buddhist insights about non-self and the constructed nature of identity. For someone with anxiety or depression considering an integrated approach, several options exist. Some therapists explicitly incorporate Buddhist practices into their work, having received training in both traditions. Others maintain a more conventional therapeutic approach but support clients who wish to engage with Buddhist practices alongside therapy. And increasingly, secular mindfulness programs offer standardized protocols that can complement ongoing psychotherapy without requiring Buddhist religious commitment. This integration benefits from certain key understandings. First, timing matters. Different approaches may be more helpful at different stages of healing. During acute crisis or severe depression, conventional interventions like medication and structured therapy often need to take precedence, creating stability that later allows for deeper contemplative work. Buddhist practices then complement this foundation by addressing underlying patterns and developing positive mental qualities that support ongoing recovery. Second, adaptation is essential. Traditional Buddhist practices were developed in specific cultural contexts for people in generally good psychological health seeking spiritual transformation. Modern integrations thoughtfully modify these practices for people dealing with significant mental health challenges, recognizing that some traditional approaches might need adjustment to be safe and effective in these contexts. For example, while traditional meditation retreats often involve extended periods of silence and minimal interaction, this format might intensify isolation for someone with severe depression or trigger anxiety for someone with trauma history. Integrated approaches might offer more gradual exposure to meditation, include more relational practice, or provide additional support during challenging experiences that arise in practice. Language and framing also matter in successful integration. Buddhist concepts can be presented in either traditional religious terms or secular psychological language, depending on what's most helpful for a particular person. Someone with a Buddhist background might benefit from explicit connections to traditional teachings, while someone without that background might engage more readily with secular framing that emphasizes practical benefits rather than spiritual goals. The integration of Buddhism and psychotherapy isn't just about borrowing techniques, but about deeper dialogue between wisdom traditions. Buddhist psychology offers insights into the nature of mind and suffering developed over thousands of years of careful observation and practice. Modern psychology contributes rigorous research methods, understanding of neurological processes, and awareness of how developmental and social factors shape mental health. Together, they create a more complete picture of human experience and transformation than either alone. From a practical standpoint, someone wishing to explore this integrated approach might begin by finding a therapist who either has direct experience with Buddhist practices or is at least open to and supportive of these approaches. They might complement regular therapy with a structured mindfulness program like MBCT or MBSR, or with classes at a local Buddhist center that focuses on meditation and practical application rather than religious conversion. Many people find that keeping a practice journal helps integrate these approaches, recording insights from both therapeutic work and meditation practice to observe patterns and connections between them. Regular communication between therapist and meditation teachers with appropriate consent can also support integration, ensuring that both approaches are working together rather than at cross purposes. It's worth noting that integration doesn't mean dilution. The most effective approaches maintain the integrity and depth of both traditions while finding creative ways to bring them together. This requires practitioners who deeply understand both frameworks rather than having only superficial knowledge of either. As this field continues to develop, training programs increasingly offer opportunities for therapists to gain authentic experience with Buddhist practices and for Buddhist teachers to learn about psychological principles and therapeutic skills. For someone struggling with anxiety or depression, this integrated approach offers multiple points of access for healing. When one approach feels stuck or limited, another might provide a different perspective or technique that opens new possibilities. This creates a more flexible and comprehensive path to recovery than relying on any single method alone. The ultimate goal of this integration isn't just symptom reduction, but a deeper transformation in how we relate to our experience, developing greater freedom from automatic patterns, more compassionate relationship with ourselves, and increased capacity to engage with life's challenges with wisdom and openness. This aligns with both the Buddhist vision of liberation from suffering and the psychological goal of growth and flourishing beyond the mere absence of disorder. As we consider this integration of ancient wisdom and modern science, we naturally arrive at another powerful approach that bridges these traditions: the deliberate cultivation of gratitude and appreciation. While modern psychology has only recently begun studying gratitude as a well-being intervention, Buddhist traditions have long recognized the transformative power of consciously appreciating the good in our lives. Gratitude practice directly counters one of the most damaging aspects of depression and anxiety: the negativity bias that filters our perception to focus on problems, threats, and shortcomings while overlooking positive aspects of experience. This bias isn't a personal failing, but a built-in feature of human psychology, evolved to keep our ancestors safe by prioritizing potential dangers over opportunities. While this tendency helped our species survive, it creates significant suffering in modern contexts where constant vigilance for threats isn't necessary for survival. Buddhist psychology recognized this negativity bias thousands of years before modern neuroscience confirmed it. The Buddha observed that the untrained mind tends to stick to negative experiences like wet paper, while positive experiences slide off like water from a duck's feather. He taught specific practices to counterbalance this tendency, helping practitioners develop more balanced awareness that acknowledges both challenges and blessings. One traditional Buddhist practice involves regular reflection on the blessings or positive aspects of life that we might take for granted. This includes contemplating the good fortune of having basic necessities like food, shelter, and clean water, the functioning of our senses and body, the presence of any supportive relationships, opportunities to learn and practice, and even the fact of being alive with the capacity for awareness itself. For someone with depression, whose attention is often locked onto what's wrong or missing, this deliberate shifting of focus can begin to rebalance perception. Another traditional approach involves mudita, or sympathetic joy, the practice of deliberately appreciating and celebrating others' happiness, success, and good fortune. This counters the comparative thinking that often fuels depression, where others' good circumstances become reasons for self-criticism rather than opportunities for joy. By intentionally rejoicing in others' well-being, we expand our capacity for positive emotion beyond the limitations of our personal situation. Modern research strongly supports these ancient practices. Studies show that regular gratitude exercises significantly increase positive emotion, improve sleep quality, reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety, and even strengthen immune function. One study found that keeping a gratitude journal several times per week led to greater increases in happiness than many other positive psychology interventions. Another found that expressing gratitude toward others strengthens relationships and creates upward spirals of mutual appreciation and connection. What makes Buddhist gratitude practices particularly effective is their emphasis on cultivation rather than just expression. While expressing thanks for specific favors or gifts is valuable, Buddhist practice focuses on developing gratitude as an ongoing mental habit or perspective rather than just an occasional response. This involves deliberate training that gradually reshapes how we perceive and interpret our experience, counteracting the negative filters that depression and anxiety install. For someone beginning gratitude practice, structured approaches often work best. This might involve writing down 3 to 5 things you're grateful for each day, being specific about what exactly you appreciate and why. It might include a brief morning reflection on the opportunities the day offers, or an evening review of moments of goodness you experienced. Some people benefit from gratitude partners or groups where they regularly share appreciations, combining the benefits of gratitude practice with social connection. Importantly, Buddhist approaches to gratitude don't involve denying or suppressing awareness of genuine problems or suffering. The goal isn't to paste a smile over pain or adopt toxic positivity that dismisses real challenges. Instead, these practices aim to balance our awareness, ensuring that our attention includes the whole picture of our experience rather than being hijacked by negativity bias. This balanced perspective actually supports more effective action on real problems because we're working from a more accurate understanding of our situation. For someone with depression, gratitude practice might initially feel artificial or even impossible. When the mind is dominated by negative thinking patterns, attempts to identify positive aspects of experience may be met with powerful counter-arguments about why nothing is really good or why any positive elements are insignificant compared to problems. This is normal and doesn't mean the practice isn't working or isn't right for you. Instead, it reveals exactly the mental patterns that gratitude practice is designed to gradually transform. Starting very small can help overcome this initial resistance, rather than trying to feel overwhelming gratitude for major life aspects. You might notice tiny moments of relief, small comforts, or brief experiences of beauty. The sensation of warm water during a shower, the momentary pleasure of a favorite food, or the fleeting beauty of clouds in the sky can serve as entry points when more significant gratitude feels inaccessible. Buddhist psychology recognizes that positive mental states like gratitude and joy are skills that develop through practice rather than fixed traits you either have or don't have. Just as you would expect to build physical strength gradually through regular exercise, these practices build emotional capacities over time through consistent training. This perspective offers hope for those who don't naturally experience much positive emotion, assuring them that these states can be cultivated regardless of starting point. Beyond structured gratitude practices, Buddhism offers the broader approach of appreciative awareness, training attention to notice and take in positive aspects of experience during daily life. This might involve pausing briefly when something pleasant occurs, taking an extra moment to really see a beautiful sight rather than rushing past it, or mentally acknowledging moments of kindness or connection. These micro-practices, integrated throughout the day, help rewire our perceptual habits to include more balanced awareness. The Buddha taught that whatever we frequently think about becomes the inclination of our mind. When we habitually focus on problems, threats, and what's wrong, we train our minds toward depression and anxiety. When we deliberately practice noticing and appreciating what's good, we begin retraining our attention systems toward greater well-being. This doesn't happen overnight, but with consistent practice, our perception naturally begins including more of the positive aspects of experience that have always been there but were filtered out by negativity bias. This cultivation of appreciative awareness completes our exploration of Buddhist approaches to anxiety and depression. From the foundational practices of mindfulness and compassion to the deeper insights about impermanence and non-self, from practical techniques like conscious breathing to the supportive contexts of ethical living and community, Buddhism offers a comprehensive approach to mental well-being that both complements modern treatments and adds unique dimensions often overlooked in conventional approaches. The journey of transforming anxiety and depression isn't about achieving some perfect state where difficult emotions never arise. It's about developing a different relationship with the full spectrum of human experience, learning to meet both pleasant and unpleasant aspects with greater awareness, balance, and wisdom. In this journey, both ancient Buddhist practices and modern psychological approaches offer valuable tools, and their integration provides one of the most promising paths for lasting transformation and genuine well-being.